The emergency family meeting was called for Sunday, March 12th at 2 p.m. sharp. I knew what it meant when Dad used his serious business voice on the phone. Someone needed money, and I was about to become the solution to a problem I hadn't created. I pulled into my parents' driveway at exactly 2 p.m., noting the 3 other cars already there. Jake's red pickup truck with the lifted suspension he'd insisted he needed for his construction job. Melissa's white BMW that still had temporary tags from the dealership. My sister Lauren's minivan, which probably meant she'd brought her kids to add emotional pressure to whatever financial crisis was unfolding. Inside, I found Jake and his fiancée Melissa sitting on the couch looking like they'd been crying for hours. Mom was pacing behind them, wringing her hands in that way she'd perfected during my childhood whenever money stress invaded our house. Dad sat in his recliner with that expression he wore when delivering verdicts rather than having discussions. Lauren occupied the love seat with 4-year-old Emma on her lap and 6-year-old Tyler playing quietly on the floor with his tablet. The coffee table was covered with wedding planning materials, vendor contracts, payment schedules, venue agreements, and a yellow legal pad filled with Dad's neat columns of numbers. I recognized the setup from previous family financial crises. When Lauren needed help with her mortgage, when my other brother Marcus got laid off, when Mom's medical bills exceeded their insurance coverage. "Sit down, Alex," Dad commanded without looking up from his calculations. I took the chair across from Jake, noting how my brother couldn't meet my eyes. At 26, Jake had always been the golden child, star athlete in high school, homecoming king, the son who'd married his high school sweetheart and given our parents the perfect future daughter-in-law. Where I was cautious with money, Jake was generous. Where I planned for the future, Jake lived fully in the present. Where I stayed single and focused on building financial security, Jake had found love and was building the life our parents had always dreamed of for their children. "There's been a situation with the wedding," Dad began, consulting his notes with the gravity of a bank loan officer. "The venue requires full payment by tomorrow morning, and we're currently short $15,000. "Short?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. "How much has already been paid?" "That's not the relevant question here," Mom interjected quickly, her voice tight with the strain of maintaining composure. "What matters is family helping family in a crisis situation." I looked directly at Jake, waiting for an explanation. "What happened to the money you'd saved for the wedding?" Jake shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "We had some unexpected expenses come up. The down payment on the house was higher than we'd originally planned, and then Melissa's car needed major transmission work, and the wedding costs kept climbing beyond what we'd budgeted for." "They're young people trying to build a life together," Dad interrupted, his tone suggesting that my question was inappropriate. "They're making responsible investments in their future. You're 31 years old and single with no dependents, no mortgage, no real financial obligations. Your money can sit in a savings account indefinitely. Their wedding can't wait." The logic was brutally familiar. Throughout my 20s, I'd become the family emergency fund precisely because my lifestyle was deemed less important than my married siblings' immediate needs. When Lauren's adjustable rate mortgage had reset 3 years ago, I'd contributed $3,000 to help her avoid foreclosure. Money that was never repaid despite her promises. When Marcus got laid off from his sales job, I'd covered his car payments for 6 months while he figured out his next move. When Mom needed dental work that insurance wouldn't cover, I'd paid for the procedures without hesitation. Each time the family narrative was the same. Alex has money because Alex doesn't have a real life. Alex can afford to help because Alex chooses to live below his means. Alex should want to help because Alex doesn't have the same pressing responsibilities as everyone else. $15,000 is a substantial amount of money, I said carefully, using the same measured tone I'd learned in my corporate job. "That's not pocket change for anyone. It's not like you'll never see it again," Melissa spoke up for the first time, her voice still thick from crying. "We absolutely intend to pay you back once we're settled in our careers and get caught up on everything." I'd heard those exact words from Lauren 4 years ago when she'd needed help with property taxes. I was still waiting for the first payment. "What's your realistic timeline for repayment?" I asked, pulling out my phone to take notes. Jake and Melissa exchanged glances that lasted several seconds too long. "Well, with the new house payments and everything getting established, it would probably take us a couple years to get ahead enough to start paying you back. But we'd definitely have you paid off before we start having kids." Dad leaned forward in his chair, adopting the authoritative posture he'd used throughout my childhood when ending arguments through sheer paternal authority. "Alex, this family has always taken care of each other when times get tough. When you needed help getting through college, we were there for you. I paid for my own college education with student loans and work-study programs, I corrected. I'm still paying those loans off actually. They'll be paid off next year. Those are just details, Mom waved dismissively as if my financial reality was somehow less concrete than everyone else's. The important point is that we support each other through difficult times. Jake's wedding is next Saturday. 200 guests have already received invitations and made travel plans. Some of Melissa's family is flying in from 3 different states. The deposits we've already paid are completely non-refundable. Without this $15,000, everything falls apart. I looked around the room at my family's expectant faces, each person clearly convinced that my agreement was inevitable. Jake, the beloved son whose happiness had always been everyone's top priority. Melissa, who'd already been accepted as the ideal daughter-in-law despite having known her for less than 2 years. My parents, who had somehow decided that my financial stability existed primarily as a resource to be allocated for other people's emergencies. Lauren, who'd never questioned the family's assumption that her mortgage crisis was my responsibility to solve. Even the children seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Emma sat quietly on Lauren's lap, and Tyler had abandoned his tablet to listen to the adult conversation with the intense focus that children reserve for moments when they sense their security might be threatened. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. Think about what? Dad's voice rose with genuine incredulity. Your brother's wedding is in exactly 6 days. What could you possibly need to think about? Whether I have $15,000 that I can afford to part with. Of course you do, Mom said with complete certainty. You live in that tiny 1-bedroom apartment, you drive a car that's 8 years old, you never take expensive vacations, you don't go out to fancy restaurants. What else could you possibly be saving money for? Maybe a house of my own someday. Maybe my own wedding when I find the right person. Maybe my retirement. Maybe an emergency fund for actual emergencies. The room went completely silent. The idea that I might have personal financial goals beyond funding their crises clearly hadn't occurred to any of them. You're being incredibly selfish, Melissa said quietly, tears starting to flow again. This is supposed to be the most important day of my entire life. And it's your responsibility to pay for it, I replied as gently as I could manage. Not mine. Jake finally looked directly at me, his eyes red with frustration and desperation. Alex, please. I'm literally begging you here. I'll do absolutely anything to pay you back. I'll work double shifts every weekend, I'll sell my truck if I have to, I'll take a second job. If you're genuinely willing to do all of those things, why not postpone the wedding for 6 months and save the money yourselves? Because everything's already been planned. Melissa burst into fresh tears. The venue is booked, the flowers are ordered, the photographer has cleared his schedule, the band has a contract. You can't just cancel a wedding 6 days before it happens. You can if you can't afford to pay for it. Dad stood up abruptly, his chair rocking back with the force of his movement. That's quite enough of this discussion. Alex, you're going to provide this money because that's what family members do for each other. This isn't a request, it's an expectation. End of discussion. Actually, Dad, it's not the end of the discussion. I said I need time to think about it, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. I stood up and gathered my jacket, feeling the weight of 7 pairs of eyes following my movement. I'll give you my answer tomorrow morning. The drive home to my apartment took 12 minutes, but I spent an hour sitting in my car in the parking lot, trying to process what had just happened. My family hadn't asked for my help, they demanded it. They hadn't presented their financial crisis as a request for assistance. They'd presented it as my obligation to solve. That evening I called my friend Marcus. Not my brother Marcus, but my college roommate who'd become a financial advisor after graduation. We'd maintained our friendship over the years, and he'd become something of an unofficial counselor whenever my family's financial dramas intersected with my life. Let me guess, he said after I explained the afternoon's meeting. Your family needs money for something they should have planned and saved for, and you've been designated as the solution. $15,000 this time. For a wedding that's happening in 6 days. Alex, we've talked about this pattern before. You cannot continue enabling their financial irresponsibility indefinitely. But it's Jake's wedding. 200 guests are expecting to attend. If I don't help them, the entire event collapses and embarrasses everyone. And whose fault would that collapse be? Mine, according to every person in that room today. According to them, every financial crisis that touches this family becomes your responsibility to resolve. When does that pattern end? I stared at my laptop screen, which displayed my online banking information. $43,217 in my savings account. 5 years of careful financial management, working overtime whenever it was available, living in a modest apartment, driving a reliable but unglamorous car, skipping expensive vacations, saying no to countless impulse purchases and lifestyle upgrades that my coworkers took for granted. Money I'd saved methodically for a down payment on a house when I found the right property. Money for my own wedding someday when I met someone I wanted to marry. Money for the security that came from knowing I could handle my own emergencies without becoming a burden to anyone else. Marcus, what would actually happen if I just didn't give them the money? The same thing that happens when anyone can't afford something they want. They would find alternatives or postpone their plans or go without. But the wedding venue, the deposits, could be renegotiated or written off as a loss, or transferred to a future date. People get married every single day without spending $40,000 on a single event. After I hung up, I spent the rest of the evening researching wedding costs and alternatives. A simple ceremony at a community center with potluck reception. Under $2,000. A small gathering at my parents' house with catered food. Maybe $4,000. A courthouse wedding followed by a restaurant dinner. Perhaps $6,000 for 20 people. My family had chosen the most expensive option available and then decided that my savings account would cover the shortfall. They'd made financial commitments beyond their means and then labeled my reluctance to bail them out as selfish. Monday morning brought a text message from Mom. Have you made your decision about helping Jake? The wedding venue needs the final payment by 5 p.m. today. I responded, still considering all the factors involved. Tuesday brought increasingly urgent messages. Alex, this is getting ridiculous. Just transfer the money and we can all move forward. Wednesday, the wedding planner is starting to panic. We need a definitive answer. Thursday brought the ultimatum I'd been expecting. If you don't help your brother, you're not welcome at the wedding. Friday morning, Dad called at 7:30 a.m. waking me up. Alex, I'm genuinely disappointed in you as a son and as a human being. Your brother spent last night crying about his ruined wedding. Melissa's family thinks we're poor white trash because we can't pay our bills on time. This situation is humiliating for everyone involved. Then maybe Jake and Melissa should have planned a wedding within their actual budget. You're destroying this family over money. I'm protecting my financial future, which is different from destroying anything. Fine. But don't expect to be welcome at family gatherings if you can't be there when we need you most. That afternoon I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. First, to my bank to arrange the transfer of my entire savings account to a new bank across town. An institution where my family had no connections and couldn't track my accounts. Second, to my landlord to provide notice that I wouldn't be renewing my lease next month. Third, to my company's HR department to formally request the transfer to our Denver office that I'd been considering for 6 months. Friday evening, I systematically packed everything I owned into categories. Essential items that would fit in my car, furniture and belongings to be donated, and important documents and family photos that I couldn't replace. My entire adult life fit into surprisingly few boxes. I spent Friday night writing letters. Something I hadn't done since childhood. One for each family member explaining my decision and my reasoning. I wasn't angry, I told them. I was simply choosing a different path than the one they'd chosen for me. Saturday morning at 6 a.m., I loaded my car with everything that mattered and drove out of town. I was supposed to be at the wedding venue by 9 a.m. to help with setup, to smile and participate in the event that I'd been pressured to finance. Instead, I was driving west on Interstate 80 with my phone turned off and my future completely open. I stopped for lunch in Iowa City and finally turned my phone back on. The notification screen was completely filled with missed calls and messages. I scrolled through them chronologically, watching my family's day unfold through their increasingly frantic communications. 8:30 a.m. Where are you? Wedding setup starts in 30 minutes and we need all hands on deck. Mom. 9:15 a.m. Alex, answer your phone right now. This isn't funny. Dad. 10:45 a.m. The caterer just arrived but the venue manager says they haven't received final payment yet. Where are you with that money? Jake. 11:30 a.m. Alex, call me immediately. The wedding is in 3 hours and nothing is paid for. Mom. 12:15 p.m. Guests are starting to arrive and the venue doors are still locked. Where is the $15,000? Melissa. 1 p.m. 200 people are standing in the parking lot in formal wear. You have completely ruined everything. Dad. 1:45 p.m. I hope you're happy with yourself. My wedding is officially cancelled and it's entirely your fault. Melissa. 2:30 p.m. You're dead to this family. Don't ever contact us again. Jake. I pulled into a truck stop outside of Des Moines and listened to the voicemails while eating a sandwich in my car. Mom crying hysterically about the shame and embarrassment. Dad shouting about family loyalty and financial responsibility. Jake's voice breaking as he begged me to call back, to fix everything, to somehow save his wedding from complete disaster. The final voicemail was from Lauren, recorded at 3:17 p.m. Alex, I don't know where you are or what you're thinking, but everyone here is talking about how you abandoned Jake when he needed you most. Some people are starting to say that maybe the family put too much pressure on you over the years, but most of the relatives think you're just selfish and vindictive. Please call me back when you get this. I saved that message and deleted all the others. Sunday morning, I checked into a hotel in Denver and spent the day walking around the city I'd decided to call home. The mountains were visible from downtown, the air was crisp and clean, and for the first time in months no one needed anything from me. Monday morning, I met with my new supervisor and confirmed my transfer. By Tuesday, I'd found a temporary apartment in a complex near my office. Wednesday, I opened new accounts at a local bank and began the process of establishing my independent life. The family group chat continued for weeks. I remained in the chat but didn't participate, watching from 2,000 miles away as they processed what had happened and assigned blame for the wedding disaster. Week 1. Alex deliberately destroyed Jake's marriage before it could even begin. Debt. Week 2. Maybe we should have helped them create a more realistic budget from the beginning. Mom. Week 3. Lauren thinks we were too demanding with Alex over the years. I think Lauren's been reading too many psychology articles. Debt. Week 4. Jake and Melissa ended up having a small ceremony at Mom's house with just immediate family. It was actually really nice and intimate. Lauren. Week 5. Melissa's been asking a lot of questions about the family finances. She seems surprised that we've borrowed money from Alex multiple times. Mom. Week 6. I've been thinking about how often we asked Alex for financial help over the years. When I wrote it all down, it was more than I realized. Mom. Week 8. Alex isn't returning anyone's calls or messages. I'm starting to worry that something bad happened to him. Lauren. Week 10. Found Alex on LinkedIn. He moved to Denver and got some kind of promotion at work. Apparently he's doing fine without any of us. Marcus. 3 months later, Lauren called me directly. Alex, I need to tell you something important. Jake and Melissa are getting divorced. After 3 months of marriage? It turns out she's been having an affair since before the wedding. She was also lying about a lot of their financial problems. Jake found out she has serious gambling debts that she never told him about. That's where a lot of their wedding savings actually went. I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out at the front range while processing this information. How is Jake handling all of this? About as badly as you'd expect. But he's also been asking a lot of uncomfortable questions about how much money the family has borrowed from you over the years. When I told him it was probably close to $30,000 total, he got really quiet for a long time. And how is everyone else dealing with the situation? Dad is still angry at you for abandoning the family. Mom feels guilty about pressuring you. Marcus thinks you were smart to get out when you did. I owe you a sincere apology. For what specifically? For never paying back that $3,000 you lent me for the mortgage. For thinking that your money was somehow our money to allocate. For not standing up for you when they demanded you pay for Jake's wedding. For treating your financial stability as a resource that existed primarily for our benefit. 2 weeks later, I received an envelope in my new mailbox. Inside was a check for $3,000 from Lauren, along with a handwritten note. I should have paid this back years ago with interest. I'm sorry it took losing you for me to understand how unfairly we treated you. I hope someday you'll forgive us. A month after that, my phone rang with Jake's number. Alex, I need to talk to you about everything that happened. Would it be possible for me to fly to Denver so we can have this conversation in person? Why in person? Because I need to apologize face to face for how I treated you. And because I want to understand how you could see that Melissa was wrong for me when everyone else thought she was perfect for our family. I didn't know anything about her character. I just knew that starting a marriage by going into debt for a wedding was creating an unstable foundation. Will you see me if I come out there? I'll pay for my own flight and hotel. I've got a steady job now working construction full-time. I'm learning how to live within my actual means. Jake visited the following weekend. We sat in my apartment while he explained how the cancelled wedding had actually saved him from a disastrous marriage to someone who'd been systematically lying about fundamental aspects of their relationship. She'd borrowed money from 3 different credit cards to pay for wedding expenses, then told me we needed you to cover the venue because her car needed expensive repairs. None of that was true. She was using the wedding as cover for gambling debts. I'm sorry you had to go through that discovery process. I'm not sorry it happened. If you had given us that $15,000, I'd be married to someone who was actively stealing from me, and we'd probably be filing for bankruptcy within a year. He looked around my apartment, significantly nicer than my old place, with a view of the mountains and enough space for the life I was building on my own terms. Alex, you weren't just protecting your own financial future. You were protecting me from making the biggest mistake of my life. I was too blinded by what I thought was love to see what was really happening. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. I know this isn't anywhere close to $15,000, but I want to start paying back what our family owes you. Inside was a check for $800. More money than I'd expected. Jake, you don't have to do this. Yes, I absolutely do. Not because anyone is forcing me to, but because it's the right thing to do. I'm going to pay you back every dollar the family borrowed from you over the years, even if it takes me 10 years to do it. 6 months later, Marcus, my brother, not my friend, called with his own confession. Alex, I've been talking to Jake about what happened with the wedding and everything that led up to it. I never really thought about how much money we'd borrowed from you over the years until Jake started adding it up. I want to start paying you back for those car payments you covered. You don't have to do that, Marcus. Yeah, I actually do. I've got kids now and I want them to understand that borrowing money comes with the obligation to pay it back. You covered my car payments for 6 months when I got laid off. That was $6,000. I should have been making payments to you all along instead of just moving on with my life like the debt didn't exist. One by one, my family members began reaching out. Not all with apologies. Dad remained convinced that I'd overreacted, but most with new understanding of how their financial emergencies had systematically become my responsibility by default. Mom called me on my 32nd birthday. Alex, I miss talking to you. I know you're probably still angry about everything that happened, but I want you to know that I've been thinking about our family dynamics very differently. You were absolutely right to protect your savings and your future. We were wrong to expect you to sacrifice your financial security for our immediate wants and needs. I'm not angry, Mom. I'm just living my own life according to my own priorities now. Would you consider coming home for Christmas? We'll pay for your travel expenses, and I promise that no one will ask you for money or bring up any financial problems while you're here. I visited that Christmas, and for the first time in my adult life, I was treated as a guest in my own family rather than a resource to be managed. No one mentioned money problems in my presence. No one asked for loans or financial advice. Jake and Lauren had coordinated to give me a gift, a framed photo of our grandparents' 50th anniversary with a note that said, "Thank you for teaching us the difference between helping family and enabling poor decisions." The wedding that never happened had taught my family lessons that a successful wedding never could have provided. They learned to budget realistically, to save for their goals, to live within their means, and to respect other people's financial boundaries as legitimate and necessary. Jake, now engaged to a kindergarten teacher he could actually afford to marry, sent me regular payments throughout his second year in Denver. In December, he mailed me a final check with a note that said, "Paid in full with interest. Thank you for loving me enough to let me fail and learn from my mistakes." A year and a half after I disappeared with my savings, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Jake and Sarah were getting married in my parents' backyard with a reception at the local community center. Simple, affordable, and focused on what really matters, the invitation said. We hope you can be there to celebrate with us. I flew home for that wedding, which cost less than $3,000 and felt more genuine than any event I'd ever attended. Jake pulled me aside during the reception to thank me again for refusing to enable his first disastrous engagement. "Sarah and I saved for this wedding ourselves," he said proudly. "We paid for everything in cash and we're starting our marriage completely debt-free. I never would have learned to do that if you'd rescued me from my own poor decisions." Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to rescue them from the consequences of their own choices. Sometimes teaching people to value money means removing your money from the equation entirely. My savings account, rebuilt and growing in Denver, represented more than financial security. It represented the hard-learned lesson that my future mattered as much as anyone else's present, and that saying no to other people's emergencies meant saying yes to my own life and goals. The wedding that didn't happen became the foundation for relationships that finally did work. built on mutual respect, genuine reciprocity, and the understanding that love doesn't come with unlimited financial obligations. As I sat in my Denver apartment 2 years later, looking at my growing investment portfolio and planning for the house I'd finally be able to buy, I realized that disappearing with my savings hadn't just protected my money. It had forced my entire family to grow up financially and emotionally in ways that my continued enabling never could have accomplished. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove yourself from a situation that prevents other people from learning essential life skills. Sometimes the wedding that doesn't happen saves everyone involved from years of financial and emotional dysfunction. The crisis I'd created by protecting my boundaries had become the foundation for the healthy family relationships I'd always wanted but never thought possible.